First up, we're
Okay,
going
we
to
are
have
good to go.
Rose. You ready to go? Okay, here we go. Let's go. Our first teller is going to be Rose Owens, and she is representing the Contra Costa Tail Spinners. And Rose, the story lady, that's the name that her children, her students in the school where she was teaching gave her that name. And she's been telling stories for over 50 years. She began as a volunteer and transitioned to professional storytelling 30 years ago. On the second Saturday of each month, she currently tells interactive stories for young listeners in the Visitor Center on the Latter-day Saints Temple grounds in Oakland. Rose writes many of the stories she tells and adapts other stories to provide a unique storytelling experience. And when Rose isn't telling stories, she is writing them. She has been published in anthologies and other online magazines. She has 3 middle grade novels and a picture book that are available on Amazon. And I will share the links to those following her story. She is the past president of the Tri-Valley Writers and currently their newsletter editor. She has 7 children and a whopping 26 grandchildren. She comes from a family of 15 siblings, so she comes from a big family. Her grandchildren know that when grandma comes to visit or when they come to visit her, there's going to be stories. Her youngest son once asked, "How many stories does mom have that I haven't heard?" And his dad replied, "She will always have a story that you haven't heard." So tonight, the title of her story is Bringing the Baby Home. Let's join me in giving a warm welcome to Rose Owens.
Thank you. Bringing the baby home. The birth of a new baby is always an exciting thing. And once that excitement happens and you have that new little baby in your arms, the next exciting thing to do is to bring that baby home, where there are adoring grandparents or excited siblings waiting to see that baby. Now, when I had my babies, it was customary to keep the mother in the hospital for 3 days. And that gave me enough time to bond with my new baby, get some rest, maybe read a book, maybe attend how to bathe a new baby demonstration. And then it was time. And they would bring a wheelchair in and put me in the wheelchair and put the new baby in my arms and wheel me to the front door of the hospital and wave goodbye. And it was up to me to bring the baby home. Now, by the time that my daughters grew up and had their babies, things had changed just a little bit. They would have their baby one day, and the next morning, the next day, nurses would put them in a wheelchair, put the new baby in their arms, wheel them to the front door of the hospital, wave goodbye, and they were on their own. Things were a bit different when I was born. There was no need to bring the baby home because I was born at home. The doctor and the midwife came to my house, and my siblings were sent to the neighbor's house until it was time for them to come home and see that new baby. Now, let me take you back about 10 more years before my birth. When my older sister was born, she was born in a hospital. And back then, it was very customary to keep the woman, the new mother, laying down for 10 days. Now, I don't know whether it was economics or whether it was that my mother just didn't want to stay in the hospital that long, but she was ready to go home earlier. And my father negotiated with the doctor, and the doctor finally said, "You can take her home as long as she goes home laying down." Well, my dad borrowed a pickup truck, and he put a mattress in the back of the truck and some blankets, and mother went home from the hospital laying down. Now, mind you, this was in Utah in February with snow on the ground. And the baby got to ride in the cab of the truck. Now, by the time that my 4 youngest brothers and sisters were born in the hospital, all of us before then, excepting Valda, had been born at home. And Ross was the youngest, and he arrived 2 months early. And on the day that Ross was born, my mother died. And my mother's cousin, Marjorie Bingham, who was a registered nurse, came to my father and she said, "Mark, I'll take care of that baby until you can make other arrangements." And so when Ross was able to go home from the hospital, he went home to the Bingham's house. And when he was stable enough to come to church, all the Pope children would run rushing over to the Binghams to see our baby. And our Eileen, who was 5, would say, his name's Ross Pope. And their Eileen, who was 5, would say, his name's Ross Popey Bingham, and he'll be Ross Popey Bingham until you take him home. Well, figuring out how to take him home was what my father was working on. And he advertised in the paper in Salt Lake, which was 180 miles away from Vernal. And there were women that came out for an interview. And the ones that Dad was willing to hire didn't want to work for a family with that many children. There would be 10 children at home. And the ones that were willing to work for it, Dad wasn't willing to hire. There was one woman in particular who had a very rigid set of requirements. I am not going to work at a house where there's a dog. The dog has to go. Well, the dog didn't go. My dad bought her a ticket, put her on the bus, and sent her back to Salt Lake. And he proceeded to solve the problem. And he finally decided that what he needed was a wife. So, to put it in his words, he said, I commenced to think about the widow women of my acquaintance. And I thought about Ella Durfee. Now, Ella's husband had died the year before, and she had 5 children that she was raising on her own. So my dad went down to her house, to the apartments. She and her husband had built apartments onto their house. They had about 3 apartments. And my Ella, she carpentered. She built shelves, she upholstered furniture, she did electrical, she did plumbing. And on this particular day, she was up on the roof with her teenage son fixing the roof. Now, at that time in her life, Ella always wore a dress, which is not the appropriate attire for being up on the roof with your teenage son. So she took a pair of her first husband's bib overalls and she stuffed that dress down inside. And she was up on the roof when my dad arrived. She was beyond embarrassed. She was mortified. And she would not come down. So he had to ask her out another time. So he called her on the phone and he thought, probably not a good idea to mention matrimony on a phone call when you're asking someone out on a date. So he asked her out for on a date, and he took her out to dinner, and they talked about this and they talked about that. And finally he said, Ella, would you be interested in coming up to Mazer, which was 5 miles from where she lived, during the day and take care of my 2 little boys? And to put it in my Ella's words, she said, I ain't gonna do that. I'd fall in love with those boys and they wouldn't be mine. I ain't gonna do that. So then my father said, well, I'm not interested in dating for the sake of dating, but if you'd care to step out with me with a view to matrimony, I'd like to take you out again. And she accepted, and they dated, and they became engaged, and then they married. Now, the first week after my dad and my new mother were married, he would come home after work and check on the kids at home, and then he'd go back down to town and spend the night with his new wife. And my new mother, during the day, she would come up to our house and she would rearrange furniture, and she took the framework and she built a framework and bunked 2 twin beds, because somehow they had to fit 4 more children into this 4-bedroom house that we were already living in. And about a week after they were married, Ella's 4 youngest children were moved into our house. Her oldest son was at school, away at college. And when things had kind of settled down, then it was time to go get Ross. And my new mother said to my oldest sister, Valda, I can't do it. I'll go there and Marjorie will cry and I'll cry and I just can't do it. And Valda shook her head and said, no, I can't do it either. So then she went to my oldest brother, Phil, and she said, Phil, you go with your dad to get Ross, because Marjorie will cry and I'll cry and I just can't do it. And my kind-hearted brother said yes. He would go with Dad to go get Ross. Then my dad heard about the plan, and my dad said, no, you're going. You're going to be this baby's mama, and you're going to go and pick him up with me. But Marjorie Marjorie will cry and I'll cry. I just can't do it. And my dad said, then you'll have to cry and she'll have to cry, but you're going. And so mom, my new mom, and dad and Phil went because Marjorie said she wanted everything gone on the same day. And dad and Phil took apart the crib, and Ella, my mom, and Marjorie packed Ross's clothes and his blankets and his bottles and all the paraphernalia that went with the baby, because he was 9 months old by this time. Packed him in the car, and when the car was packed, Marjorie took Ross in her arms and she gave him one last hug. And she kissed him on the forehead and handed him over to his new mother. And my mother cried, and Marjorie cried. Back at home, we were all excited. Our baby was coming home. And we rushed to the door to meet Dad and Ella and Ross. And it only took us 9 months to bring the baby home. And that's the story of bringing the baby home.
Thank you very much, Rose. That was amazing, very funny, very personal. Thank you very much. I'm gonna go ahead and put the links to her books in the chat, and feel free to give some love to Rose in the chat. I will ask you guys, once the teller starts telling, let's refrain from putting anything in the chat. We'll do it in between our tellers so we don't disturb their stories. Well, what a beautiful story from the Rose, the story lady. Now we know why you were given that moniker. We're going to move on into our next speaker. And our next speaker will be Chris Bell. And he is a guest storyteller from Boston. So we're very glad to have you here, Chris, as our guest storyteller. Chris Bell is a storyteller who finds inspiration in everyday moments as a husband, a father. When sharing a personal story or taking long walks through the city, Chris connects with life's simple joys, especially when pizza is involved. The title of his story tonight is Fumbles and Fatherhood. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Chris Bell.
Thank you. It's Saturday morning. I'm watching my son Zach play soccer, and his team is getting massacred. These awkward sixth graders are all scattered across the field like a confused cloud of tadpoles. All you can hear are the sound of penalty whistles, bickering, and disappointment. Across the field, the other team's already celebrating. Their coach, who I call Mr. Sunglasses, points finger guns at our kids and shouts, "Booyah!" Another one bites the dust. Now, I thought we were supposed to be teaching these kids how to kick a ball, not how to kick other people when they're down. So, powered by the groans of several other pissed off parents, I march straight to the sidelines, stand right next to this so-called coach, and start cheering for my son's team. But I don't only cheer, I put on a whole halftime show. I'm dancing and prancing with invisible pom-poms, and the other parents shout out enough support that right before the game ends, the kids actually score a goal. Now they're all jumping around, giving each other high fives, even though they still lost 17-1. After the game, my son limps over, covered in dirt, and says, "Dad, please don't cheer for me anymore. It's embarrassing." And my smile freezes, because in that moment, I'm reminded of being a 14-year-old freshman in high school. I'm on the football field practicing for our first game, and it's not going very well. As a running back, my job is simple. When the quarterback holds out the ball, I grab it and run for a touchdown. The problem is when I get nervous, my hands always shake and I fumble the ball. Truth is, I know more about Dungeons and Dragons than I do touchdowns and tackles. On the other hand, my father was a big football star in high school, so he likes to spend his time watching the games instead of rolling dice and battling evil wizards with me. But when I told him I made the football team, he lit up like I said the Super Bowl. He said we can even get pizza after my first game. So I don't want him to come and see me fumble the ball. I just want him to come and see that I'm good at this, like him. So, over the next few weeks, I practiced for hours after school. Three basic movements: spread my fingers, grip the ball, tuck it in tight. Over and over, I practice until my hands ache and my fears callous. On game day, we faced the Titans, a towering team of 25 who all look like grown men who pay bills and barbecue. I'm in the huddle, heart pounding. I see my father sitting in the stands. The coach calls out, "Sweep right," and I know I'm about to get the ball. Unfortunately, the Titans know it too. The play starts. I sprint towards the quarterback. The Titans come crashing in, just tossing our team around like gorillas escaping the zoo on Family Fun Day. But I dip my shoulders, lunge forward, and right before the quarterback crumbles, I clamp onto that ball like a vice grip. I got it, and I'm not letting go. Now, I was so focused on not fumbling the ball, I never actually stopped to think about what I'd do when I got it. And that's when a wall of bodies blocks out the sun. I cut left, I cut right, looking for daylight, but all I can find are hands and helmets. My body hits the ground with the force of a skydiver whose parachute didn't open. And as I stagger to my feet and hobble, I'm in full body agony. And that's when I hear a voice rise from the crowd. "What the hell is he doing? Running like a damn chicken with no head. I guess they just let anyone on this team." Now, before the game, the coach warned us that the other players or even their parents might shout out some things to take us out of the game. So as I hobble back to the huddle, I just hold my head down as the laughter and criticism continues and hope no one can see the tears that are starting to form underneath my helmet. Because right now I'm being mocked in front of my entire school. And that voice in the crowd, it's my father. On the next play, the coach decides to give me another chance. Sweep left. And this time, I just fumble the ball. After the game, there's no pizza or even conversation with my dad. I grow up not seeing what he did as being wrong. I just see it as yet another time that I proved that I'm just not good enough. But as I start to mature and listen to my father talk about his past, I mean, really listen, I start to see a little boy, a sad little boy that hides behind his eyes. A little boy who cried when he was often shuffled in between two young parents. A high school football star who wasn't allowed to graduate next to his white teammates. A soldier stationed in Alaska with only three other men who all petitioned to have the Negro reassigned. And I started to see that there's always been someone in my father's life to make him feel like he wasn't good enough. Now, it's not an excuse for his behavior, but it did help me see one thing. It was really never about me. Now I'm the father, standing on the soccer field, and my son, he's asking me not to cheer for him. And as hard as it is, I don't try to explain. I just meekly smile and agree. And as he runs to the car, excited to get some pizza, I just hope he knows if he ever wants me to cheer for him, I will. Because I already know what happens when a child is consistently knocked down. And I just want to see what could happen if a child is consistently built up. Thank you.
Wow. Very emotional, Chris. Very touching. I think a lot of us can identify to those stories in there. Thank you very much for sharing that. Let's
Thanks
get
for the
some love.
opportunity.
Yeah, let's give some love to our guest storyteller from Boston, Chris. That was beautiful. A couple of minutes there. We'll share one little story we heard from Chris last night. When his kids left his family, when they moved on from college, Chris found that he kind of lost a job that he really loved. And then there was this incredible silence in the household with him and his wife. And I think many parents identify with that story as well. So thank you, Chris, for sharing everything with us this week.
Thank you.
Right, our next teller number 3 is going to be Toby Ishii Anderson. She is representing the Asian American Storytellers in Action, AASIA. As a Peace Corps volunteer and then an international school teacher, Toby has lived in various countries in Asia and Europe. She has had the good fortune to gather stories from many diverse cultures. She's a member of the Asian American Storytellers in Action and the South Sound Story Guild. Experiencing various genres of stories has widened her view as she fosters multicultural awareness and sensitivity during these interesting times. The title of her story tonight is Game Night. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Toby Ishii Anderson.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you. You owe me money and lots of it. I owe you nothing. Money is thrown up into the air. Monopoly money. This is Anderson family game night. Now, my family, the Ishii family, we play games like Go Fish. Do you have any fives? No. Go Fish. Sorry. Brett and I were newlyweds, my husband and I, and it was November, and he said, Toby, we need to go and see my family for Thanksgiving. And I go, I really rather stay with my folks, you know, Brett. We need to go to New York and visit my family. And then my mother, so wise, she says, Toby-chan, you marry Brett. You marry his family, ne? So off we went to New York. And it was a lovely Thanksgiving dinner with that beautiful juicy turkey and the apple pie, pumpkin pie, mashed potatoes, which I absolutely love. And when dinner was finished, the siblings just cleared the dining room table. It was game night. And Brett, my husband, he went up to the cupboard. Game of life? Nah, too serious. Risk? Too many treaties. I got it. And it was this worn out, tattered looking box. Monopoly. And the M was so worn out, you could barely see it. He opens the box, takes out the board game, puts it on the dining room table, and then dumps all the pieces. Brett grabs the race car. I'm the oldest. I get the race car. Then the siblings look at me. Toby, you can have that. It was the iron. It was the only piece left. So we put our pieces on Joe, and they roll the die. Unleash hell. They go around and they're buying up all the real estate and getting all kinds of money. Now it's my turn. I roll the dice. Oh, community chest. Go directly to jail. Do not collect $200. Oh, well. I go to jail, and I'm waiting very patiently as everyone is still buying up all the real estate. And finally, it's my turn. I take the dice. Come on, Toby, come on. And I roll doubles. I'm about to move my piece out of jail when Beth says to me, Toby, you got to roll doubles twice. What? Twice? Yeah. Anderson family game rules. I was flabbergasted, but I was very silent. But in my head, I was drawing out my katana samurai sword. And if I had a chance, I would have just torn that whole board to ribbons. But I remember what my mother said. Toby-chan, you marry Brett, you marry his family, ne? So I waited very, very patiently. Then it was my turn again. Okay, come on, Tobes, you can do this, you can do this. Roll. Doubles. Okay, I gotta do it again. Come on. Secret charm, roll. Doubles! I get out of jail and I'm moving and I thought, I understand now how these guys play the game. So I started buying up all the property. I started buying all the railroad pieces. I was a railroad mogul and I was raking in the money and my houses were being built. And then it happened. Burke landed on one of those blue spaces. Boardwalk, a very expensive piece of real estate, but it belonged to his sister, Beth. You owe me money and lots of it. I owe you nothing. Oh, chairs scrapping on the ground. Beth trounces upstairs. Burke goes to the kitchen. Brett looks at me. Game over. Toby, you want some whiskey? Well, I gotta tell you, nowadays, when it's Anderson family game night, and they take out that Monopoly game, and they dump all the pieces, I get the race car. And that is Anderson family game night.
Thank you very much, Toby. That was wonderful. I think it brings us all back to our childhood and that famous game we all played. So thank you very much. And everybody related to those stories too. Let's give Toby some love in the chat. All right. Coming to our middle teller of tonight, and that's Arlen Hackett. He's representing the Storytellers of San Diego. Arlen is the kid who couldn't figure out what career to pursue because he was interested in too many things. When I read that, I said, that's me too, Arlen. So I'm there with you. As a storyteller, he loves telling stories in many different genres and usually weaves into his stories real life experiences. The title of his story tonight is Back to Nature. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Arlen Hackett.
Better turn my audio on. You know, do you have any pencil or paper near you? Because you might want to take notes on this. I'm going to give you an idea for a birthday party. And, you know, you don't have to follow my suggestions, but I'm going to tell you about my birthday party, which was in April. And it was my 80th birthday. Now, I'd gone to the 75th, planning a 75th party, and whammo, COVID. So there was no 75th party.
Okay, I'm going to stop this because I just wanted to hear my friend and she just finished.
What?
Go ahead, Arlen. I think someone was off, not on mute. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm okay to go ahead?
Yes, Alan.
Okay, I'm not sure what's going on here. Anyway, so what happened with this party is, okay, so 75 to 80. My career has been primarily as a chef and as a culinary teacher and a culinary historian. So I decided I was going to do something wild and crazy, over the top, and have a party, invite 50 people. And I was going to take 8 decades of my life, being 80, and try to tell a story with dishes. Have the food tell the story. So what I'm suggesting to you right now, start thinking about, if you were going to tell the story of your life through food, what would it be? How would you do it? Would it be decade by decade, whatever? So I'm expecting to hear some great recipes in a couple of weeks. I don't know. Am I supposed to continue?
Yes, please do.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Sorry.
Okay. I'm not sure what's going on here. Okay. So I took, I thought about important parts of my life that had a lot of meaning, and how could I take a dish and have it symbolize that part of my life? And so 23 dishes later, I had a party for 50 people. Now, I'm not going to go through all these dishes, but I went to Peru. I love Peru. Machu Picchu is perhaps one of the most beautiful places in the world. So I had a Peruvian dish of roasted potatoes with a Peruvian green sauce. I studied Spanish in Mexico for 3 different summers. And my favorite dish from Mexico is mole poblano. And so I made that. And then there were some things that were kind of like, I will create a symbol, but it's not exactly anything that happened during that period. I made a salad that represented Southeast Asia. And that was really about the Vietnam War. Now, for people of my age, and particularly men, you can't go through life without giving some consideration to how that changed a lot of us. You know, you could have been in the military, you could have been a draft dodger, but no matter what, your life was changed. So I've often said that, you know, this war was, what did it accomplish? You know, I felt that way. But I'm going to tell you something wonderful about that war, is a whole lot of immigrants moved to America and they opened restaurants. Before that war, I'd never been to a Thai restaurant. I'd never been to a Vietnamese restaurant, but I love that food. That's one of my favorite cuisines in the world. And I might say that Thai food is now like ranked 2nd or 3rd in the United States as the most favorite food. And so, you know, that was an easy thing for me to do. And then I had to do something about my mother, because that was important to me. And so I made burnt sugar cake, which was out of the Depression. And my mother's name was Goldie. And I had memories of my mother telling me that her life was saved by the midwife who saved her life and her mother's life, my grandmother. And her name was Goldie. And so that, for me, has always been a touching moment. It's also important because the last Goldie is Black. And in Kansas in 1911, I'm not sure how that was. I actually do know how it was, because later in life, I realized how my grandmother's sisters reacted to her birth. Okay, so what comes down the pike is, about 3 years ago, I was given 2 documents, and I have them right behind me. So, about 850 pages of family history, and it was particularly documents about letters and things in my family, and I started reading them. And, you know, as a kid, I loved cowboy movies. I really especially liked the Indians. I was always in the game of cowboys and Indians. I wanted to be the Indian, okay? And I read this and I kind of went, what? I went through I think I read all 850 pages. I never saw the word Indian. I never saw this word Redskins. The word I saw was savages. And it was kind of a jolt. It was a kind of jolt to how this all was. So I started researching that time period. And it kind of changed my life a bit. So quite briefly, how it goes is that, Europeans came and they saw the native people and considered themselves very superior, even though Thomas Jefferson would eventually say that it was because of education and that they were living that kind of lifestyle if they had other opportunities. Now, because I say this because Thomas Jefferson also advocated for the extinction of Native Americans. George Washington compared Native Americans, Indians, to wolves, except that the wolf and the Indian had different shapes. Now, this kind of thinking went on, and Andrew Jackson took it a lot further and wanted really to clear the United States. Okay, so I'm going to read this because I want to make sure I can give it to you exactly as it is written. I'm going to read you about what Theodore Roosevelt said. I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indians are dead Indians, but I believe 9 out of 10 are, and I shouldn't take to inquire too closely in the case of the 10th. That was Theodore Roosevelt. Now, in all of this, I have to say one of the most moving things as I am researching was when I came to this passage. This is about what presidents have said about Native Americans. What we have done with the American Indian in its way is as bad as what was imposed upon the Negroes. We took a proud and independent race and virtually destroyed them. We have to find ways to bring them back into decent lives in the country. And who said that? Richard Nixon. And when I read that, I go, whoa, my head is turning a little bit here. And I read from passages of Native Americans that he was one of the most supportive presidents they've ever experienced. And just for the hell of it, I'll read you something that Donald Trump said when in his first presidency. He's speaking before a group of Native Americans. You were here long before any of us were here, although we have representatives in Congress who they say were here a long time ago. They call her Pocahontas. So you always wonder sometimes, what is our progress? What is it? What is it all about? And that really changed how I looked. So what I did when I realized that my family was part of a group of settlers that drove the natives away from the land, and my family was part of the settlers that deliberately killed buffalo to starve them. It's not an easy pill to swallow. I mean, it's just really so immensely sad for me. So for my birthday party, I thought about this. I did some research on the food of the Native American and whatever. And, I always have this picture of Plains Indians. I'm from Kansas, and I see these vast prairies, and I see teepees, teepees. And they're out there on the prairie. And then I read the real story. They didn't want to be out there in the prairie. They wanted to be next to where there was water. So their teepees were next to creeks and rivers. And they actually didn't just have buffalo, they grew vegetables. But the settlers came in and destroyed them. And so, the whole thing about the railroads and all of that a lot of it was, for instance, when the trains came through and the railroads were built, and Kansas was very important because it was the center of the nation. Actually, they had hired hunters to sit in the train cars and kill buffalo because they knew that would destroy the Native American culture. Now, let's get a little happier here because, you know, I'm not one of these persons to say that I need to drown in the pain of the past. I want to look for the hope, how we learn from something. So I learned with research that along those creeks and rivers, those Native Americans were growing pinto beans, they were growing corn, they were growing squash, they had choke cherries and huckleberries. There was game, there was deer, there was bison, there was antelope, there was catfish, and there were berries for days, wild berries. And I remember the first time in my life that I ever had watercress was when a biologist friend had me taste wild watercress at a spring. I didn't know watercress grew out there in the wild somewhere. And he taught me to look. He also taught me to realize that in the trees in my father's pasture, there were grapes growing, wild grapes. And he taught me to look out for birds. And guess what? There was that black-capped chickadee that was on Christmas cards that I could not believe that ever could have been in Kansas. And it was so beautiful to see. So here I am. When I think about what do we say about what was the contribution to culture from the Native American, it's a real simple statement. The Native Americans taught the world what crop rotation was. They taught to put corn and beans and pumpkins side by side, and it would fertilize the soil. They were taught to take garbage, so to speak, and put it in the ground. They did not waste anything. And for that, I am very thankful, and I think it's very important. So here I am. You know, if you want to have a party, I will tell you, there was burnt sugar cake, there was cheesecake with choke cherry topping. I had never had a choke cherry in my whole life until this party. So happy birthday for your next birthday.
Thank you very much, Arlen. That was a wild ride of the decades of your life. You don't look 80, so I'm going to start off with that. And the different foods, and a loop there, we went into American history and how it affected you and your family, and how we need to reflect and try to understand better. So thank you for that story. It was, in a word, delicious. Go ahead, let's show some love to Arlen in the chat. Some of you may have noticed that one of our storytellers we had on the flyer is not with us. So we had a storyteller jump in the last minute, and that's going to be our next storyteller. That's JT Mooring, and he also is a member of the Storytellers of San Diego Guild. So thank you very much, JT, for stepping up at the last minute to help us out and create our show. JT sings stories and tells songs. He's a traveling man, which provides a lot of material, including the experience that led to this story titled, It Should Be All Right. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to JT Mooring.
Thanks so much, Lee, and everybody. How am I sounding now?
Sound great.
All right, we'll try and carry on with that. I like my home in Encinitas, California, but I also like going out and seeing other things. A couple weeks ago, I was out in Hawaii. Back in June, I did a festival up in Alaska, up there for the first time. In fact, my wife and I put on a storytelling workshop, which neither of us had ever done before. That was cool. Earlier in the year, we were off in Florida. Problem, though, is planes make me nervous. Actually, planes don't make me nervous. It's flying in planes that makes me nervous, because we're sitting inside this big chunk of metal going 600 miles an hour up in the air where there's really no oxygen, but there is lots of gravity. Not only that, but the airlines have given me other things more specific to make me nervous. Between Alaska and Hawaii, I flew back to Ohio to my 50th high school reunion. I bought a ticket on a thing called Breeze Airways. Now, I knew nothing about Breeze Airways except that they fly direct to Cincinnati, and the price you end up paying is significantly more than the original price they quote you. So I went into the San Diego airport with some trepidation, not knowing what to expect from Breeze Airways, but I got down to the gate and it looked like a respectable, airline. They had people at the gate. They had a little desk. I looked out the window. It looked like a respectable airplane. So thought, so far, so good. I will sit here and wait till they tell me to board. And when it came time to board, they came on, and I don't know the exact words that they told us, but this is the gist of it. They said, we turned on the plane. It has an error message. We're going to reboot it and see if that error message will go away. Okay. So we sat there and waited for them to reboot the plane. And 10 minutes later, they came back and said, well, we turned the plane on. There's no error message. So we think it'll be all right. It should be all right. So we all got on the plane and we flew off to Cincinnati at 600 miles an hour up in the no oxygen zone and got off at the other end. And it was all right. The whole time we were flying, there may have been red lights flashing in the cockpit, but they didn't tell us about those. So that was all right. But it still didn't detract any from my airline nervousness. In fact, it reminded me of another time a couple years before. I was flying into Baltimore. I like sitting by the window, and I was looking out the window, watching the trees and the fields and the streams go by. And finally, we start descending and coming in, and I could see those landing lights coming up. And then the plane, I feel the engines kick in, and the plane lifts up and makes a hard turn to the right. And the pilot comes on and says, our ailerons are not working. Now, I didn't even know what ailerons were, but I inferred that having them not working when you're coming in for a landing in an airplane is a bad thing. So if I'd known then what I know now, I could have said, hey, you could try rebooting the plane, but I didn't know that. So I let them go ahead with their maneuvers. And what their maneuver was to fly out over the Atlantic Ocean and fly it around in circles for long enough to burn off all the extra jet fuel. So the next time we came down and landed and crashed, the explosion would be smaller than it would have been otherwise. So while we're out there doing that maneuver, I looked over at my wife. She's sleeping peacefully, and I was trying to decide, should I wake her up or not? And I looked at her. She had headphones on. She looked like an angel sleeping there, and I decided not to wake her up. Number one, because she looked so happy and peaceful. Number two, because sometimes if I wake her up, she gets grumpy, and I didn't want to spend the last minutes of my life with my wife being grumpy. And third thing was, I was afraid if I woke her up and tried to explain the situation, she would ask me what an aileron was, and I didn't want to spend the last moments of my life feeling like an idiot either. So I did not wake her up. And we finished those maneuvers. We came back in, headed for the airport again. And this time the pilot comes on and says, well, the ailerons are still not working. We're going to come in a bit fast, but I think it should be all right. Now, I appreciated his optimism, but I could have done with a little bit more definitiveness on the outcome. So I was looking out, watching those landing lights come by us again, looking over at my wife. I was holding her hand. She looked like an angel. I looked out the window again and I could see other lights. And these were red flashing lights. And it looked like they had brought every emergency vehicle from the whole greater Baltimore area and lined them up along the runway. I guess so, in case we had that explosion, they would be there to take care of it. But I didn't understand why they had red lights on. It wasn't like they were trying to get through traffic or anything. And I was afraid those red lights were kind of stressing out my pilot a little bit. So I wish they would have turned those off, but they didn't. And we did come in fast and we hit the ground hard, but we did not crash. And there was no explosion of any size whatsoever. And I don't know what the emergency vehicles did. I assume they turned their lights off and went back to wherever they were. And when the passengers realized that there was no explosion and we were coming to a stop, everybody, including me, clapped and yelled and cheered. And that woke my wife up. And as soon as she figured out what was going on, she berated me for not waking her up, which I kind of felt like she should be cheering with the rest of us, but that wasn't the first thing. I told you she gets grumpy, right? But you know what? Here we are a few years later, and we've got past that little glitch in our relationship. We still travel together. In fact, next week we're flying off to Omaha to see my daughter, and I expect I'll be sitting on the window seat. I expect I'll still be nervous about flying. I expect Mary Jo will be sitting next to me. She still lets me hold her hand, and she still takes naps on planes, but she always makes sure to wake up before it's landing time. But the thing we got out of that adventure was, now whenever life throws something at us, we can look at each other and say, well, I think it should be all right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, JT. That was amazing. I have one tip for you. Next time you fly, bring a dictionary with you. And that might help you out a little bit. All right, that was an incredible, intense story. I loved it. I think everybody else did too. Very funny too. Let's give some love out to JT. And once again, thank you for jumping in last minute to be part of our show. We really appreciate it.
It was a great pleasure.
Excellent. All right. All right, let's move on to our teller number 6, which is Jane Dorfman. And she is representing Voices in the Glen. And that is an organization that gets participants from Maryland, Virginia, and DC. And Jane Dorfman tells traditional stories, literary tales, a few lies, and some genuinely true stories. Originally from New Orleans, she lives in Maryland and is seemingly president for life of the Voices in the Glen as a storytelling guild that is part of Maryland, Virginia, and DC. The title of her story tonight is Daddy's on the Roof and He's Got the Axe. Let's give a warm welcome to Jane Dorfman.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is a story from a long time ago when my husband and I were first married. We lived in Annapolis at the end of a dead-end street and across from an older couple named Annie and George, who had sort of adopted us as extra children. And if you ever needed anything, advice, a tool, that's who you went to. So we'd had a terrible storm the night before, and there were tree limbs down everywhere. And I went over and asked Annie if she maybe had something we could chop those limbs up with. And George came up behind her with his walker and said, she's got an axe hung up in the basement with 4 golden nails. And Annie turned to him and said, they're brass. And I said, what, did you guys do a little axe murdering in your youth? No, said George. Annie saved a whole family from being chopped up into little pieces. George, Calvin wouldn't have hurt those children. Wife, maybe. So, sensing a story coming on, I took the offered iced tea and we went and sat in the kitchen. And he said, "Oh, it was a long time ago. And it was in the summer. It was so hot, no air conditioning, just an old ceiling fan. George was at work. He had a good job down at Tillman's Jewelers doing engraving. My boys were off somewhere. And the girl, the biggest girl from the people who lived behind us before we built the big fence, came running through the azaleas yelling, 'Miss Annie, Daddy's on the roof and he's got the axe.' And I went barreling through the bushes, and sure enough, Calvin Healy was on the roof. Not of the house, but of this low shed. He was sitting up there in the blazing sun. He had an axe in his hand. He had the handle in his hand, and he was smacking the head of the axe up and down on his hand. And I said, like a fool, "Calvin, what are you doing up there?" And he said, "Miss Annie, they're trying to take me to the crazy house." He meant Crownsville Mental Asylum, and I knew there had been some talk about taking him out there if he got up to anything else. And so I said, "Well, Calvin, it might be nice. You could get some rest. You could, set your mind that nobody's taking me anywhere." Smacking the axe up and down. He was in some work shirt. He was all sweated through. And I remembered the lemonade I had made. And I said, "Well, Calvin, I just made lemonade. Would you like a big cold glass?" And he said, "Yes, Miss Annie, that'd be real nice." So I went back through the azalea bushes, and my eyes lit on this big glass tankard that George had won at some fair. So I put all my lemonade in that and every ice cube I had, and I carried it back through the bushes to Calvin. It was so heavy, and it was all wet with condensation by that point. You couldn't hold it in one hand. So I lifted it up and I turned the handle towards him, and he had to give me the axe in my other hand so he could grab the mug and guzzle it down. Yeah, I told her she was lucky he didn't put it in her scalp. Well, that might be the case. So while he was guzzling the lemonade, I looked over at the wife and I nodded with my head towards my house, and she said yes. She was holding the youngest in her arms, nursing. She was the first woman I ever saw nurse in public. Of course, you see it all the time now, but back then you didn't know where to look. So the other children, all 5 of them, followed me back to my house, and I said, "Well, who wants to see the train Tommy got for his birthday?" And they all went into Tommy's room, and I set the train going. And we had Kool-Aid with no ice. And I sat down with a cold cloth on my head. And they watched that train all afternoon. One of them even went to sleep on Tommy's cowboy bedspread. Just before dinner time, the wife came over. She said, he went along peacefully enough. I couldn't give her back the axe and say, "Well, here's the axe your husband was fixing to scalp you with." So I just kept it. Yeah, when I got home, I wanted to call the Evening Capital and tell them that Annie had saved a whole family. I wanted to take the axe down to the jewelry store and dip it in bronze like we used to do baby shoes. You never told me that. I just now thought of it. He wanted to hang it up in the living room. So we compromised on the basement with 4 golden nails. All right, with 4 golden nails. Oh my goodness, I said, "What happened to Cal?" "Well, he was shut up in Crownsville and we went to visit him." "You did?" "Well, he was a neighbor. That's what you did. We took him a can of bubble mints, those airy pink and green mints you give people who were in the hospital." "Yeah, wasn't that a mess? Tell her." Well, it was. He was in a long ward full of moaning and groaning men. And he opened the bubble mints. Well, back then they opened with a key, like a sardine can, and it pulled off a long strip of metal. He couldn't have cared less about the candy, but he held that strip of metal up in the sunlight. He said it was his pretty thing, and he was going to get a whole row of those strips of metals and let them catch the light. It was going to be his pretty thing, and he would let all the other men come and look at it. Well, by that time, the nurse down at the other end of the ward got sight of that metal strip, and she came down in her little white shoes and she said she would have to take it away because someone might cut themselves on it. And Calvin began hollering about how it was his one pretty thing and he got a grip on it with both hands. Those edges were real sharp. By the time the orderlies came and we left, blood was dripping off his elbows. Look at me, I'm crying over some fool 20 years in the ground. I still see those children. His oldest daughter let me use her employee discount on the dress for young George's wedding. It was a sad case. And then George said, well, you like stories, huh? I got stories. I'll tell you about the time that Dr. Weems came into the jewelry store and he wanted me to come with him on a house call. You will not tell her that story. I can tell her that story. She's a big girl. Well, George, why couldn't the man come into the store? Wasn't on his finger, was it? And Annie was pushing me out the door, and she said, I think there's a saw in the shed. That old fool, he's all wound up. So she pushed me out the door, and there was in the little shed everything in its place with a little line around it to show you where to hang it. There was the perfect little saw. I knew she would have it. She said, this is what you need. It'll work like a charm for you. And I thanked her. And I said, but Annie, did he ever come back? Who, dear? Cal, did he ever come back? Oh, yes, lots of times. That's it.
All right. Thank you very much, Jane. That was a very, very thrilling ride through that story.
Thank you.
All right. Let's give some love to Jane. I love the voices and the vocal variety. Very cool. And I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat some additional information you can find about Jane.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move into our teller who's going to wrap up the evening. That's Genevieve Ann Franklin. And she is representing the Do-Tell Story Swap. And she's been absorbed throughout her life by the effects of words on the human spirit. She discovered the joy of personal storytelling on her first visit to the Moth at Berkeley's Fright and Salvage in July of 2017, where she was astonished to hear her name called first when they pulled the name out of the hat. That first Moth moment revealed a calling to create simple but richly meaningful narratives meant to touch the soul and enchant the heart of the listeners. She's a member of the Sonoma County's Do-Tell Story Swap, and having placed in Toastmasters and National Storytelling Network Story Slams, and share stories in person and virtually at the Moth and other venues near and far. The title of her story tonight is The Color of Fortune. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Genevieve Ann Franklin.
Thank you. It's good to be back. I am Mexican American. I'm Mexican American by virtue of 3 separate immigrant stories: my father's, my mother's, and my own. My father conferred the right of United States citizenship to me by being born in El Paso, Texas, on September 22nd of 1917. He had 3 older siblings who were born in Mexico, where his father and mother resided in northern Mexico during the Mexican Revolution. However, the revolution made things a bit dicey, and my grandfather, who had owned a mercantile company, had decided to throw a coin toss with his partner. Because among other things that they had clients like Pancho Villa, whom they had to serve, and who would pay them sometimes in IOUs, sometimes in Villa pesos. But the whole situation was getting a little bit hot. So my grandfather felt that he won the coin toss because he was bought out by his partner, who was going to stay in the fray, And my grandfather packed all his belongings in a horse cart and put his family in a train and put the pesos and the coins into a little chest and headed north, crossed the open border and settled in El Paso, which is where my father was born. There, my grandfather, seeing the huge exodus comings and goings of the troubling times, decided he would use that donkey and cart and create a carting business. When he got enough money from the carting business, he decided that his growing family should not have to pay anybody else for milk. So he bought a cow. And then he saw there were a lot of neighbors who could also use some nice milk. So he bought a second cow, and then another, and another. And that's how ultimately he created a dairy that all his kids worked on, which lasted for 100 years. Let's see. Right. The thing that happened was that when he had moved to El Paso, by the time he got there, the money that he'd gotten paid for his share of the business was worth 40 to 1, or 1 to 40, perhaps is better said, which is why he started that extra business. And the fact that he is successful is particularly incredible, given that in those days, there was a lot of anti-Hispanic sentiment, particularly at the Depression, where you could commonly see signs that said, no dogs, no Negroes, no Mexicans. I am Mexican American. I am so by virtue of 3 separate immigrant stories, my father's, my mother's, and my own. My mother would ultimately confer on me the gift of Mexican citizenship by herself being born in a small town some 280 miles northeast of Mexico City, where they ultimately moved to provide more cultural and intellectual challenges for their children, which were not available in the small pueblo where she had been born. She and her 3 sisters were talented musicians, intellectual, and on top of that, they were little spitfires of humor and pranks. So they had no problem getting people to come courting. But one day, my father's family went to visit my mother's family in Mexico City, and Anita and Tommy just saw sparks and ultimately were married. They moved back to the United States. World War II had broken out, and my father served in the military. I am Mexican American. I am so by virtue of 3 immigrant stories, my father's, my mother's, and my own. My 2 oldest siblings were born in Texas, but my father moved the family to Guadalajara, Mexico, to start a unique dairy there. First pasteurizing dairy in Jalisco. And that is how the 3 remaining children, with me being the youngest, were born and became tapatíos. 4 years later, my father's business called him back to El Paso. And so we packed up and went to El Paso, which is where I definitively became Mexican American. El Paso was a border town that was a wonderful mix of the 2 heritages that built it. I never felt strange in any school, in any event, in any store. It always seemed like we were all one great big family. I had a passel of cousins. There must have been dozens, and we were all of a different color. Some were a little bit espresso. Some of them were double lattes like me, but we were all basically coffee. I had friends who were, well, Anglo white chocolate, but I never felt that I was any less morenita, which is the affectionate term for a dark-skinned person, a dark-skinned young girl, than any of my Chicano friends were. So as a result, between my comfort in being there and the what was it? Oh, basically, I did not myself experience very much negative treatment as a result of my skin color. I wasn't even aware of it. But my siblings did from time to time. There was at the time a television Western called The Cisco Kid. And my brother, who had curly hair that was black and was darker skinned than I was dubbed the Crisco Kid by his classmates, because after all, he was a greaser, for those of you who remember what Crisco is. And on an occasion to Central Texas, when my two sisters were at a diner speaking in Spanish to each other, a stranger came up to them and gestured to them to leave, pointing to a sign on the wall, reminiscent of the 30s, that said, "We don't serve dogs, Negroes," except it was the N-word, or Mexicans. When I moved to the Bay Area, I became an interpreter. That put me in a position of being aware how intentionally and unintentionally justice was often not served. And there were discrimination based on the characteristics of people's identity, skin color being one of them. I was very grateful that what I considered to be my skill at interpreting and at communicating and building bridges was able to overcome the biases that jurors or justices or attorneys or even the parties in court themselves might have based on that. Because I was bilingual, I often would encounter this. If I was speaking to a group of English speakers and I dropped a few words in Spanish, they would turn to me and say, "Genevieve, how is it that you speak such good Spanish?" And I would tell them the story of Chihuahua, northern Mexico, where my father's father came from, El Paso, Mexico City, El Paso, Guadalajara, El Paso, and everything was fine. However, curiously, if I was in a group of primarily Spanish speakers, and I was speaking Spanish to them, of course I was going to speak Spanish to them, big deal. They would turn to me and say, "Señora, ¿cómo es que usted habla tan bien el español? Ma'am, how is it that you speak such good Spanish?" And I would tell them the Mexico, US, Mexico, US, Mexico, US story again. In fact, from time to time, I might even be a little bit sassy and say, when they'd say, "But you don't look Mexican." And I would say, "I look like a lot of Mexican people you've never met." Well, we'll see where that takes me. When the Black Lives Matter and the other movements that grew monumentally in 2020 and thereafter, I came to a place of reckoning about my assumptions. And I'll have to read it to you because I want to get it right. I read a quote by film director Adam Rudolph that really characterizes what I began to go through. Human identity is the most fragile thing that we have. And it's often only found in moments of truth. With that, one day I was at a meeting for an organization that was being moderated by someone I deeply respect. And she asked the group there, "Look around you. Do you see anything missing?" And we're in the depths of DEI before our current administration, of course. And everybody seemed to, in a chorus, say, "There's no people of color here." Oh, I had them. I raised my hand and I said, I am Mexican American. And the moderator said, yes, Genevieve, but you pass for white. I was stunned. I was Mexican American, as Mexican American as anyone can be, but I was not. Everything came together for me in a humbling experience one day when I greeted a cashier at one of my favorite grocery stores that has a good amount of Latino personnel. She was beautiful. She had thick black hair and glowing cinnamon skin. And I said, hola, qué bello día, ¿no? Hi, beautiful day, isn't it? And she said, sí. But then she said, pero señora, ¿cómo es que usted habla tan bien el español? But ma'am, how is it that you speak Spanish so well? You know what I answered? Then I added, you know, people always seem surprised to find out that I'm a Latina. She paused and looked at me with her dark but sorrowful brown eyes. And she said, Señora, ma'am, qué suerte tiene. You are so fortunate.
Thank you very much, Genevieve. What a very interesting story of what a lot of Americans go through. So thank you. Thank you. And here is something Genevieve wanted you all to see, the sign she's referred to. It's a true sign in El Paso. Can you see the screen
Yeah,
share?
thank you. Thank you so much for showing that.
All right. Yep.
Thank you for listening, everybody.
Dated February 20th, 1929. We still have a long way to go. Okay, at this time, why don't we go ahead and put a spotlight on our 7 tellers, and we'll let them come forward and tell us a little bit more about what they're doing and share with all of us. We start with Rose.
Okay. I'm currently writing. I'm writing a science fiction YA fantasy novel. I just got through writing chapter 27. It's a long ways to go. I have an unfinished, I have a rough draft of a magazine, another middle grade novel, which is, it's called The Outlaw Trail. And it's the story of Hank, a 10-year-old boy who doesn't want to be a banker like his father. He wants to be an outlaw like Butch Cassidy. So he ends up with the things that, so I'm working on that. And other than that, I'm traveling back and forth to Utah to visit grandchildren, telling stories. Any questions you have for me?
Oh, it was a great job. And you were a teacher for a while. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, Rose?
I taught special education, 6th, 7th, and 8th, 7th, and 8th graders. I found that anytime that it was appropriate that I started a lesson with a story that I had them hooked. There was one student in particular, I still remember Tony. That kid would just settle into a story. You just visibly could see him settle into that story and internalize it, and and this was a kid that was bounced in and out of reform school and whatever, but the language of story spoke to him. And it was just really awesome to have that experience.
Yes. Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Rose, the storyteller. We always appreciate when you come and tell. So thank you. And our second teller was Chris Bell from Boston. And thank you very much, Chris. We hope you come back again and tell with us again. That was a very cool story.
Thank
share
you
what's going
all.
on with you.
Really appreciate the opportunity. I'm just honestly doing a lot of writing. In the past, I've done a lot of storytelling at the Moth. I just had a story on the Moth Radio Hour about a couple weeks ago, and I just got notified that they're going to put another one of my stories on Moth Radio Hour. I'm not sure
Wow.
exactly when that's going to be. So I check every week. Am I on? So, um, but other than that, I probably have a list of about 10 different life experiences I want to write about. I don't really write for themes anymore. I just write what I need to get out of my system. Currently struggling with one, and I'll just kind of give you the first sentence to it. Um, she looked at me and said she loved me, but I seem like the kind of guy who will never leave Boston, and this isn't her home. 15 years later, I'm standing with a stuffed suitcase, $5,000 in my pocket, and I'm wondering why I can't find a single street sign in Paris. So I gotta
Excellent.
figure it out, but it's gonna get out of my system. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm up to.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Chris shared with us yesterday that when the kids left the house, he had to try to figure out the pieces of his life, which were a puzzle, and how they all fit together. And that was pretty cool to hear that. And he also said
You
those
can't
are
tell
the-
the story better than I do.
Oh, no. And then he also mentioned that he does these very long walks. One of them was 23 miles in New York City, where he
Yeah,
likes to look at what's going on and I thought that was incredible. And he
Yeah,
walks around
I took
Boston.
it's actually I posted on my Facebook page. I can actually post it in the chat. It was a 23-mile walk from Coney Island in Brooklyn to 125th Street in Harlem. And I like doing that, not every week, like 23-mile walk. Like I was doing 13 miles every week for a while, but it just gave me a lot of time to meditate,
Yes.
think about my life. So
I was thinking, why didn't you just walk another 3 miles, 385 yards, and that would have been a full marathon, Chris? And you could have said, I actually walked a marathon. But
the last 7 miles I was crawling. That's why.
I can believe it. No, it's all very impressive.
Amazing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any questions for Chris?
Actually, I do, but it's a practical one. The moth stories that got on the radio hour, are they more stories that they pulled from your stories at the slams or stories that you pitched to them?
No, I've never pitched. I've always just gone to the slams.
So they just have reviewed them and gotten your stories
Yeah,
straight?
yeah, and you just keep on going. Just focus on telling your story and being happy with it. Don't focus on the judges.
Exactly.
Oh, heavens no, not the judges.
I just want to make one
I
more.
just want to tell a story.
Yeah. I want to make one more comment about your story tonight, Chris. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, but you used a lot of figures of speech. It got similes and metaphors, and every time you did that, it had the punch, where you related something to something else. And I think everybody got it. So I love it when tellers do that. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let's go ahead and move on to Toby. Is she Anderson?
Thanks, Lee. Well, let's see. I've been working on a piece, historical research piece, which is totally brand new for me, and it's Japanese American oyster farmers in Oyster Bay, Olympia, and it's something that's been so interesting because I love oysters anyway, and the idea it's kind of rabbit hole. It's one thing leads to another, and getting hold of parents who have passed away, but trying to find their children to find out the story. That all has been interesting, and that's been taking a lot of my time. It's great that there's so many of you who are writers. I've dabbled in little articles, and I'm trying to write an article for actually a sportsman magazine on fly fishing. and it has to do with traveling in various parts of the world to go fishing. But really, there's no place like home. The best place is right here. Don't tell anybody, okay? In this state. And also doing work with the Asian American Storytellers in Action. We have a YouTube channel called Storytopia, Asian American Storytopia. So there are 23 episodes of videos and activities, primarily for kids, kindergarten to grade 5, but also it's very interesting for adult audience too. So working on that and just dabbling in local storytelling events.
So excellent. Thank you very much, Toby. If you have any links you want to put in the chat, go ahead and do that.
I will. Thank you very much, Lee.
That storytelling channel is really nice. I've looked at a bunch of stories on there.
Oh, thanks, Jane.
So we actually had quite a good mix of people tonight. Prakrati is from British Columbia. Toby is from the Olympia area of Washington. I'm in Seattle. We have Chris from Boston. So we have a nice big spread, even though this is the Storytellers Association of California. Of course, we have everybody across the whole state there. And we got to hear from Arlen, who grew up in Kansas. So we're getting a good mix. We have a lot of people of color here, and this is what it's all about, sharing our lives and our stories. So thank you very much. Let's go ahead and move on to our fourth teller, which was Arlen.
I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. I mean, really. You know, one of the things about certain ages or their milestones, you know, 75, I thought was a milestone. It's diamonds, you know, 75. And so I want to do the 80th. And a lot of things have happened since then. You ask yourself, now what the hell am I going to do? What is important? Do I buy more clothes? I might be dead next month. Should I buy these things? I mean, it sounds corny, but it's still part of how I feel. I also have a lot of emotion about our country, the politics. I am very scared. You know, I am a gay man married to a Mexican man who has been an American citizen for 24 years. And all hell can break loose. And I have had students who are American citizens who have been taken away. And this is not normal. You know, I remember the first time that I went to a concentration camp, saw it. And if you've never been, go. Because it's so vivid. It's so, you know, I kept going, this is like a movie set. I mean, Steven Spielberg got it right. It's identical. And so, yeah, you know, I'm very political, and it's how do you tell stories and provide meaning and not drive people crazy. You know, I'm not sure I would say I don't want to offend, but I want to keep a dialogue open. And one of the groups that I most want to come have a dialogue with is younger people. Younger people. I think that they need to talk and hear things out. And I've said enough.
All right. Any questions for Arlen? Yep. No, thanks for sharing your story, Arlen. And of course, whenever somebody introduces food throughout their story, we all start to salivate and we're drawn in. That was good. But you had a lot of other really hardcore material. Yeah.
One of the things I learned is that being a chef, you're the most popular person in the party. Because everybody wants to talk about food. They want to know what you do this. You know, I used to always say, everybody thinks that the big topics are sex and weather. That's not true at all. The big topic is what you eat and where you want to eat and all of that. So yeah. I never had any problem getting a conversation going as soon as somebody knew I was a chef. But anyway, these days I'm thinking of other territories.
All right. Thank you very much, Harlan. We much appreciated your story today. And from his same guild, we have JT Mooring. So JT, why don't you tell us a little about what's going on with you?
I'll do that. First, I'll thank Arlen for bringing up the uncomfortable topic of politics. It's a challenge for us that get a microphone to balance that line between beating people over the head with what means a lot to us and trying to entertain them. So it's something I'm struggling with. So thanks for bringing that out. I didn't think I was going to be spending this section of my life standing on the street waving signs at people, but here we are. But when I'm not doing that, I'm telling stories, but I came at stories through music. I write songs and perform them, and a lot of those are just stories that rhyme and have melodies. And some of my favorite performers break up their singing stories with spoken stories, and I wanted to be like them. And Marilyn McPhee has helped me do that, and going through Toastmasters has helped me do that. I spent a few years there doing tall tales and things, which I enjoyed a lot. And now I'm making music and getting on stage and trying to find that balance between entertaining people and trying to push the world in the right direction a little bit.
Excellent.
If you want to see my music, you can go to myname.com, jtmooring.com.
Yep. Put that in the chat there. Okay. All right. Any questions for JT? Yeah, very, very interesting story. Very, very intense. We wondered if the plane was going to crash and burn and we're never going to see you again, but hey, it all worked out well. That was great.
Didn't want to give any spoiler alerts.
No, no, no. And you had that angel right next to you. So that I think really helped out. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our sixth teller, which was Jane Dorfman. Jane, tell us what you're doing.
I have some local storytelling going on. My group has a monthly swap, 1 month online, 1 month in person. I'm going to be telling with fairy tale variations in September, which I really better start working on that story. They're doing Puss in Boots. So that'll be fun. I haven't told with them before. And in the DC area, the Virginia actually is Better Said Than Done, that has events all the time, and they have a wonderful women's festival, which you can watch online for the most part. And if you're in the area, it's really worth going to. It's to cut the balance of, it's to tip the scales a little bit towards women tellers, because you so often see an event, they'll have 5 tellers, 1 woman. So this is all women and all different kinds of stories. That's a really neat event. I have some Halloween stuff coming up maybe, and some stuff for kids, but that's about it at the moment. I'm working on I've gone down this rabbit hole of Greek myths, and I'm gotten one done, which is sort of a braided story with the Greek myth and then my neighbor's bipolar son. And then I've started on another Greek myth. They're really wonderful, and I had read them maybe, but not these. These are kind of obscure ones. So they've been a pleasure so far, and that's about it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for
You
having me.
also shared that you do kind of a one-woman show of Calamity Jane.
Calamity Jane, yeah. I'm always looking for places to tell that again. I told it at the NSN conference, and that's really a lot of fun. Once I put that hat on, I feel like I'm sort of channeling Jane, the other Jane. So it's neat.
Right on. Any questions for Jane? Sounds like a lot of good stuff you're doing there, Jane.
Thank you.
Glad you were here with us tonight.
You have another one person show besides Calamity Jane. I don't remember what it was.
I tell some other stories in the first person, but I don't have any other historical things like Calamity Jane. She's just special to me. I don't think, I can be interested in Florence Nightingale or Jane Goodall, but they don't all have to be Janes. But anyway, just Calamity Jane, I could make a whole program of that, huh? Anyway, but Calamity Jane is just special. I don't know that I'm ever going to do another one.
How long is it, Calamity Jane?
It's upwards of 45 minutes. So I tell as Jane, and then I have questions in a box that I pull that I pretend are from the audience, and then I let them ask me questions, and then I take off the hat and happily put my glasses back on, and then I tell a little bit of the end of Jane's life.
Right on. All right,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you very much, Jane, for sharing.
Could you share the details for that women's festival that you said?
It's in March. I don't have the dates off the top of my head, but it's always in March, and it's in Fairfax, Virginia.
Okay, okay, I'll look for it. Thank you.
It's Better Said Than Done, and Jessica Robinson are the organizers. So if you go to Better Said Than Done, I'm sure they're going to promote the Women's Festival.
All right, excellent. Let's move on to our last teller, which was Genevieve N. Franklin, and the N does not stand for North. Let's hear from you, Genevieve. What's going on?
That's right. I don't have anything going on. I'm going to put my very simplistic kind of disorganized YouTube channel in there. I don't know what the thingy is. I just know that if you Google Genevieve Navarre Franklin, Listen to My Heart, you'll get there. But if you do Listen to My Heart, you're going to get some old rock song. So you got to put Genevieve Navarre Franklin or Jenny Franklin. But I have some other videos on there that I've done, some of my moth stories. But I'm really grateful to everybody that has made these genre stories possible. We've talked a little bit about the situation with what I call the situation with our beloved country, but between everybody at SAC that has put effort into keeping us telling stories, it's very healing, it's very important. And here's something that I wanted to share, which is that I began to dabble in this. I just couldn't quite how to put the pieces together. And I was amazed at how much I discovered when I began. I looked for a picture, or I looked for some facts. And I mean, those of you who do this seriously know this, but I found out that in the 30s, somewhere between 300,000 and 2 million Mexican people were removed from this country. Most of them voluntary removal. It was called the Great Repatriation. But it was voluntary because it was the thing that you were supposed to do. And there was like train loads, 1,500 people in a train being moved back to Mexico. And just a lot of different things. The two signs that I found, I'd been told a story by my sister about being in the diner with the no dogs, no N-word, no Mexicans. And then I found 1929, when my father was 12 years old, same sign. So it's all very instructive and amazing. But anyway, I just want to say this is a beautiful venue, and thank you to all the listeners as well.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Genevieve?
I just want to make a comment.
Sure.
I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Giant with Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor and James.
Long ago.
And there is a classic scene in the diner. And when you were talking about this, I was thinking, oh my God, there's the diner. I can hear the conversation. And if you have a chance to see that scene, it was a very moving scene, and one of the first times in film that this subject was addressed. It was really important. And all of those actors were really behind it, along with the author, Edna Ferber.
Right. Had James Dean in that movie as well, correct?
James Dean.
Yeah. All right.
I think also that the stories connect us, and we find correlations with other stories in the past. And we find guidance as to what to do or not do.
Mm-hmm.
When I was young, I used to, after reading Anne Frank, I kept on wanting to put myself in the position, what if I were just one of the other Germans? But also, what if I actually used to wonder, what if I passed for not being Jewish? What would I do? And I find myself that now I'm in that position. I am that person that I wondered about.
Yes. All stories tonight gave us all something to think about. And